Welcome everybody. Let me introduce myself. I'm Francesco Liguori, a PhD student in European Union Law at La Sapienza, University of Rome, and I will try to guide you on this cycle of 9 lectures in order to discover the foundations of the European Union. In particular, we will focus on the functioning of the Union, its strengths and weaknesses, and the European citizenship. The aim of the entire course, entitled Being Active European Citizens, the ultimate goal for an ever closer union, is to make you, young European citizens, more aware of the European integration process so that you can contribute to the development of an ever closer union among the citizens of Europe. The journey we're about to undertake would not have been possible without the support of your teachers, and especially that of the association Confinemondo and the European project Citizens in Action. In this first lesson, we will focus on the biography of two of the founding fathers of the European Union, namely Jean Monnet and Altiero Spinelli. Let's begin with the biography of Jean Monnet. Jean Monnet was born on the 9th of November 1888 in Cognac, Charente, into a family of cognac merchants. His father, Jean Gabriel, son of wine growers, had taken the helm of a cooperative of small producers in 1897, which he gradually bought to form a family business. Charente had been open to the outside world since the 12th century, very early exporting salt and then wine to the British Isles. From the 19th century, its eau de vie were appreciated worldwide, and it is significant that the main producers of the time, Hennessy and Martel, were both of British origin. The Cognac region was therefore very early aware of the vastnesses of the world. People were naturally more interested in international affairs, on which trade depended, than in what could happen in France. It was in this context that the young Jean Monnet grew up. At the family table, he sees customers and collaborators from all origins, speaking all languages and reporting news from all over the world. The teenager is fascinated by their stories, mainly because, although he's a good student, he has little taste for learning things theoretically. In fact, he received no secondary education and did not enter university, as his father sent the young Monnet abroad, where he worked for the family business. Notably, in 1905, at only 16 years of age, Jean Monnet left for the city of London, where he learned English and business from his father's local agent. At the age of 18, the young man feels ready to face America and undertakes the first of these great transatlantic crossings that he will love for the rest of his life. His father advises him, "Do not take books. No one can think for you. Look through the window. Talk to people." America is a revelation for young Jean. The endless spaces, the simplicity of contacts, the business spirit fascinate him. There he soon forges bonds of friendships and trust and discovers his great negotiating skills. At the age of 22, for example, the young Monnet signs an important exclusive distribution contract for Western Canada with a powerful Hudson Bay company for the family's cognacs. On this occasion, he established strong personal ties with the directors of this company, which had considerable financial resources and a large fleet of merchant ships. World War I broke out in 1914, but Jean Monnet did not serve in the army for health reasons. Consequently, he was reformed. However, having noticed the total lack of coordination between the French and the British, especially at sea, he managed to meet René Viviani, head of the French government, to submit his ideas to him. Viviani was convinced and at the age of 26, Monnet successfully set up Franco-British supply committees. From 1919, Jean Monnet contributed to the creation of the League of Nations, desired by US President Wilson, the first international organization dedicated to peacekeeping. In particular, Monnet proposed the idea of uniting Britain and France to defeat Germany. He suggested a plan that was later approved and helped Monnet gain credibility in the European political arena. Therefore, when the League of Nations was created in 1920, the then 31 years old was appointed as General Deputy Secretary of the organization. He was number 2 in charge of operational functioning. However, the General Deputy Secretary was disappointed with the functioning of the organization he was leading. In particular, he regretted that governments and their representatives were more concerned with defending their own interests than with solving the common problems they faced. The right of veto, still present in the functioning of the United Nations Security Council, is for him the symbol and cause of the impotence to overcome national egoisms. Meanwhile, Jean Monnet worked as a French diplomat in Washington. It was without bitterness that Jean Monnet resigned from the League of Nations in December 1922 to join Cognac and help his father rebuild the family business damaged by American prohibition. Soon, the cognac business was no longer enough for him, and when in 1926 he was approached by an American merchant bank to open an office in Paris, Monnet did not hesitate for long. The booming American banks wanted to take advantage of the period of reconstruction in Europe to finance large industrial and national loans. Jean Monnet had the perfect profile. In 1929, before the October crash, Jean Monnet left for the United States to assume the vice presidency of an American bank formed by the merger of his bank and a large local bank, Transamerica. In 1938, Monnet was the French government's representative who negotiated the delivery of military aircraft from the United States. In the following years, he headed the Franco-British Economic Committee. Notably, Monnet proposed a plan to create an alliance between France and Great Britain. To this end, the idea was expressed to create a common constitution, parliament, government, and to introduce a common citizenship. During the Second World War, Monnet established friendly relations between Great Britain and the United States. For this active work, he became an advisor to President Roosevelt. The president listened to Monnet's advice and in 1941 launched a successful program proposed by Monnet consisting of the mass production of weapons to be supplied to the Allies. After the liberation of France, Jean Monnet drew up a plan for the development of the country, thanks to which the French economy was completely restored after the war. Jean Monnet and French Foreign Minister Robert Schuman put forward the idea of merging the German and French coal and steel industries, which were to be supervised by a specially created supranational body. Jean Monnet took the opportunity to propose to Robert Schuman to pool the coal and steel resources of the two former enemies under the authority of an independent entity. This proposal, which would give rise to the European Coal and Steel Community, was worked out by Jean Monnet with his collaborators during a long working session in his home. Referring to the obstacles to the Union, this historic note to Robert Schuman, dated on the 28th of April 1950, explains that the way to overcome them consists in acting immediately on a limited but decisive point. The common production of coal and steel would immediately guarantee the creation of common basis for economic development, the first stage of the European Federation. The Foreign Minister immediately realized the historic significance of this proposal and agreed to promote it politically and to the public. On the German side, the offer is unexpected. It amounts to an instant reintroduction of yesterday's enemy into the field of visitable nations, albeit at the price of major concessions. Indeed, the plan gives France and other future treaty signatories access to important German resources. However, Chancellor Adenauer also perceives the historical significance of the proposal and immediately accepts it. On the 9th of May 1950, on behalf of the Chancellor, Monnet was able to make an official statement to the French government. He prepared a declaration outlining the idea of uniting all Franco-German coal and steel production under one direction and allowing other countries to freely join the Union. Monnet said, "This approach is the first step towards a European federation and the preservation of peace." The treaty establishing the European Coal and Steel Community was signed on the 18th of April 1951. Subsequently, on the 10th of August 1952, the highest governing body began its work in Luxembourg under the leadership of Jean Monnet. It consists of 8 members appointed by common accord for 6 years. The European Coal and Steel Community was an independent legal entity. It consists of the supreme governing body, the European Parliament, the Special Council of Ministers, and the Court. In 1952, Jean Monnet became the first president of the European Coal and Steel Community. Monnet proposed a defense plan to the French Prime Minister, namely the creation of a European army under the joint command of Europe. The creation of this army was supposed to resist the forces of the Soviet Union. However, on the 13th of August 1954, the French National Assembly chose to leave the treaty that had established the European Defense Union. Therefore, 1 year later, Monnet chose to create the Committee of the United States of Europe. The first meeting of this committee was held in January 1956. The issue addressed was Euratom, the aim of which was to unite the European forces along the lines of the European Coal and Steel Community in order to close Europe's nuclear gap with the great powers and facilitate its future energy independence. Convinced that the two treaties should be signed simultaneously, the Action Committee is committed to making parallel progress on the common market. The two treaties, Euratom and Common Market, are signed in Rome on the 25th of March 1957 and ratified by Germany on the 5th of July. France ratified the two treaties shortly afterwards. The beginning of the 1970s was favorable to the relaunch of Europe's economic and political union. The principle of a monetary union and the European Monetary Fund, supported by the Monnet Committee, progressed. This committee approved the formalization of the European Council of Heads of State and the principle of electing the European Parliament by universal suffrage. In 1975, at the age of 87, Jean Monnet dissolved the Action Committee for a United States of Europe. Monnet spent his last days at his home in Ujara writing his memoirs. At the end of 1976, Jean Monnet's memoir, Memoir of European was published. 3 years later, at the respectable age of 91, he died. The Jean Monnet's commitment to the realization of the European Union can be summed up in a single sentence. Europe has never been. Europe still needs to be created. Indeed, the European citizens, driven by a common goal, namely to avoid a new armed conflict, were to join together and form a perfect social, economic, and political integration. This integration was to be pursued gradually through the guarantee of the four fundamental freedoms: the free movement of goods, persons, services, and capital. As I've already mentioned, another founding father of the European Union as we know it today is Altiero Spinelli. He was born in 1906 in Rome. Son of a socialist family, he joined the Communist Party of Italy at an early age to oppose the regime of Benito Mussolini's National Fascist Party. Following his entry into radical journalism, he was arrested in 1927 as an opponent of the fascist regime and spent 10 years in prison and further 6 in confinement. During the war, he was interned on the island of Ventotene along with some 800 all other political opponents of the regime. In 1937, he was expelled from the Communist Party for opposing Stalinism, undermining the Bolshevik ideology, and supporting Trotskyism. In 1941, well before the outcome of the war was safely predictable, Spinelli and fellow prisoners Eugenio Colorni and Ernesto Rossi completed the Ventotene Manifesto, entitled For a Free and United Europe, a draft manifesto. The Ventotene Manifesto argued that if the fight against the fascist power were successful, it would be in vain if it merely led to the reestablishment of the whole European system of sovereign nation-states in shifting alliances. This would inevitably lead to war again. The document called for the establishment of a European Federation by the democratic powers after the war. Because of a need of secrecy and a lack of proper materials at the time, the manifesto was written on cigarette papers concealed in the false bottom of a tin and smuggled to the mainland by Ursula Hirschman. It was then circulated through the Italian resistance and was later adopted as the program of the European Federalist movement, which Spinelli, Colorni, and some 20 others established as soon as they were able to leave their internment camp. The founding meeting was held in clandestinity in Milan on the 27th or 28th August 1943. The manifesto was widely circulated in other resistance movements towards the end of the war. Resistance leaders from several countries met clandestinely in Geneva in 1944, a meeting attended by Spinelli. The manifesto put forward proposals for creating a European Federation of States, the primary aim of which was to tie European countries so closely together that they would no longer be able to go to war with one another. As in many European left-wing political circles, this sort of move towards federalist ideas was argued as a reaction to the destructive excesses of nationalism. The logical underpinnings for a united Europe can thus be traced to hostility to nationalism. In the founding meeting of the European Federalist movement, Spinelli said, if a post-war order is established in which each state retains its complete national sovereignty, the basis for a Third World War will still exist even after the Nazi attempt to establish the domination of the German race in Europe has been defeated. In 1970, Spinelli was nominated by the Italian government to be a member of the European Commission from 1970 to 1976. Taking responsibility for industrial policy to develop European policies in a new field. Spinelli then decided to run in the first direct elections to the European Parliament in 1979 and was elected. He did so as an independent candidate on the list of the Italian Communist Party, which by then had become a Euro-communist party and was keen to have prominent independent figures to stand on his list of candidates. To this end, he began to gather like-minded members of the European Parliament around him, taking care to involve members from different political groups. An initial meeting at the Crocodile restaurant in Strasbourg set up the famous Crocodile Club, which, once it was of sufficient size, tabled a motion for Parliament to set up a special committee to draft a proposal for a new treaty on European Union. The idea was that the European Parliament should act as a constituent assembly, although Spinelli was prepared to make compromises on the way to secure broad majorities behind the process. On the 14th of February 1984, the European Parliament adopted its report and approved the draft treaty establishing the European Union. The decision was taken with 237 votes for and 31 against. Spinelli's project was soon buried by the governments of the member states. However, it provided an impetus for the negotiations which led to the Single European Act of 1986 and the Treaty of Maastricht of 1992. This happened with the help of several nation parliaments which adopted the resolutions approving the draft treaty and of French President François Mitterrand, who, following a meeting with Spinelli, came to the European Parliament to speak in favor of its approach, thereby reversing France's policy of hostility to anything but an intergovernmental approach to Europe. Spinelli believed that intergovernmental cooperation with full national sovereignty in organizations such as the Council of Europe was not enough. For this reason, he was firmly committed to further integration and, in particular, to European Constitution. His draft treaty establishing the European Union, the so-called Spinelli Plan, approved on the 14th of February 1984, sums up his thinking. The document formed the basis for the Single European Act of 1986 and for the Maastricht Treaty of 1992, which established the European Union. The basic idea was to create a supranational European government to prevent further wars and unite the countries of the continent in a united Europe. Its beliefs inspired many changes in the European Union, most notably the increased powers of the European Parliament. Altiero Spinelli died in 1986, and the main building of the European Parliament in Brussels is named after him. Thanks for your attention.